Now that you've seen so many other buildings with similar forms, twisting shapes arise in the past 10 years, what's your reaction? And do you wish you'd done anything differently with the turning torso 10 years ago?
No, I think certainly in many aspects, turning torso was rather a pioneer building. Nevertheless, also because it is so slender, isn't it? Although it's not by far not the tallest building, but the slenderness, I mean the relation of the ratio from the width of the basis to the height is enormous high. And so it was also an interesting technical achievement for the time. And since the turning torso merged from the idea of the human body, I thought it was a good proportion, a good ratio.
In your own work, is that something you've taken from that project and applied elsewhere, that proportionality? Or what lessons does that project have for you that you've applied and developed over the years since then?
Well, certainly you see the Chicago Spire was, in my opinion, even more slender, even more daring as it should be, even taller also, 2,000 feet high, isn't it? I mean, in other words, you know, the step of the Chicago Spire for me will be never possible without having done before the turning torso, which it is a logic way, you know, one like a painter, you know, one painting brings the other and so on. It's a succession of, you know, one painting gives the solution to the previous one and is the problem for the next one.
Back to the turning torso, another way that it was pioneering was incorporating a biogas system where waste from the building contributes to energy generation. Was that difficult to get off the ground back then? And have you become more interested in such waste-to-energy projects or on-site energy generation in your buildings since then?
Well, you see, we have been always very conscious, you know, about the impact, the environmental impact of our building. Working in Sweden, Swedish are almost pioneer, you know, in this type of approach, you see, to do. And my client, HSB, is also, as I say, 90 years, those days, you know, of experience, you know, working in development, and they has been always doing modelic settlement. So, I mean, it has been always our preoccupation, you see, of achieve buildings that are, I mean, not only architecturally correct, but also environmentally, you know, very adequate.
The steel structure that wraps the turning torso, was that the only option considered for how to reinforce that building? How did you take the sculptural form that it started with and realize it as a building? What sort of structural ideas were considered?
Of course, you see, when you started dealing, you know, with the problem of making a building like the turning torso, I mean, it's not a joke, you know, it's a tall building, you see, it's a very tall building, it's exposed to the winds, exposed to problems of turbulences, you see, of vortex shading, you know, shading of the building, accelerations, and all of that, comfort of the people living there. And then you are confronted with the real reality of finding artiluge, you see, to control of all of that and deliver a structure who is, first of all, feasible and even economically feasible. Like, for example, the repetitivity, you know, the sliding core, the structures, the elements in the spine by itself, you know, who are rather repetitive and all of that. So in housing or living up, the restrictions are very high, double as high than in offices, for example, where the people move much more, you know. But in your house, you may maybe see it, read a book or watch television or whatever, or even, you see, and then you have to feel well, isn't it? So this restriction was possible to accomplish without having to add a mass damper into the building through the interference or the common work of the spine with the core. The core much more rigid with a much higher frequency, you see, and the spine itself very elastic, you see, with a much lower frequency, own frequency. So both together, they in a way or another complement and makes a comfortable building. I mean, it's just to give you an example, but what it is important is to understand that no thing there, you see, as it happens, as it should happen also in architecture, you see, is just done by case. Everything you see, as I say, in my opinion, architecture is a very cerebral discipline, isn't it? It's also a very cerebral art.
Yeah, I want to ask you one more question about that. It's interesting that you say about sculpture and painting, and I wonder if you consider your buildings sculptures and how you draw the lines between sculptural forms and architectural structures that arise to meet demands.
You see, certainly architecture is not a sculpture, certainly, for sure, because mostly the arts are complementary. So architecture is also complementary to the rest of the arts. However, you see, it nourishes itself from all of them. You see, I mean, that, for example, one of the most beautiful moments of expression on architecture is, in my opinion, written by Victor Hugo, you know, the French writer, in the Notre Dame de Paris, in the chapter Ceci tuera cela. It's one of the most beautiful apologies on the architecture I never read in my life.
What does it say?
Just not to tell you also, for example, you know, the most beautiful support to painting, you know, is the architecture of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, where Michelangelo has done this wonderful work. And if you take away the figures, you will see there is a whole coulisse, a whole scenography done in architecture. You see the arcs, he painted the arcs, he painted capitals and all of that. So almost 40–50% of the painting is architecture that he recreate in the vault of the architecture of the Sistine Chapel. So what I want to say with that, it is that architecture is the most abstract of all the arts. Is the most abstract. And it is even done with all kinds of materials. With stone, with concrete, with steel, with glass, with wood, with fabric, with whatever. You understand? Even with branches of trees and things like that. You can do architecture with mog. You can do, you know, the huge are built with mog, isn't it? Or even, you see, I mean, it's just to tell you that, you see, so, and as material as it is, I arrived to the conviction that it is almost like an aura or a skin, you understand, who virtually involves, you know, the buildings themselves. And even it is not the building itself, you know, but this aura, this skin, you see, who makes the building, you know, touch us and move us.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.